Hello, dear listener. I'm so glad you're here. Tonight, I'll take you back far beyond the stories you've heard before. Before kingdoms, before names, before even the first village fire, there was a time when people did not build homes, did not marry, did not farm or trade. They moved with the trees. They slept among the branches. They loved without promise. They survived without possession. This is the story of the Layar, the first tribe that walked the earth when humans still remembered how to be apes. Close your eyes. Let your breath grow quiet. Let your thoughts return to the time before time. And now we begin. They never built a house. Not a roof, not a wall, not a corner. No doors, no stones, no skins hung like cloth. They did not need shelter the way we do. The world itself was their shelter, their roof. They moved with the leaves, the sun, the air, and when the wind grew soft, they stopped. They did not ask the trees for permission. They climbed, quiet as dusk, and did not fall. They slept in branches, cradled by wide arms. Limbs curled around their bodies like slow vines. They did not use pillows or woven mats. Their skin touched bark, smooth and rough at once. The children nestled higher, where leaves were thick. The mothers stayed below, their legs wrapped firm. The men lay wherever the limbs could hold them. They did not gather together, nor sleep apart. They simply became part of the tree each night. No one watched them sleep. No one kept guard. There were no sentries, no weapons, no alarms. They trusted the night to pass, not to harm. And most nights it did, quietly, like breath. Their clothing was bark tied round the hips, sometimes softened with smoke, sometimes left dry. It crackled faintly when they walked or moved. They wore no shirts, no shoes, no coverings above. When it rained, they let the rain fall. When it burned, they stepped into shade or stream. They were not ashamed of skin or scent. The Layar knew their bodies as they were, silent, strong, marked with dirt and grace. They smelled like the world they lived in, and the world did not mind. They never built a fire without cause. They never struck stones just to see the spark. They watched others make fire and remembered the rhythm. But most nights they slept without it. They did not fear the dark. Their children had no fathers. There were no husbands, no pairings, no bonds. A woman carried a child, then raised it. Others near her might help or might not. No one asked where a child had come from. No one asked where a man had gone. He had passed by, and now he was gone. That was all the story they needed. The Layar knew no marriage. They did not share names or promises. They met, they touched, they moved on. There was no anger in parting. There was no plan for return. They loved as deer might, briefly and wordlessly. A glance, a press of skin, a moment. Then one would walk back into the trees. The children were not lonely. They were held when they cried. They were fed when they reached for food. They were taught by watching, by copying hands. No one called them mine. They belonged to the tribe, and to no one in particular. When a child was old enough to climb, they were old enough to choose a branch. No one told them which tree was safest. They learned by falling, and they did fall. But they also clung and rose again. The tribe did not gather in circles. They were not led by one voice or hand. They followed the wind, the warmth, the season. When the cold came, they turned south. When the heat came, they returned north. Always moving, always silent, always slow. The forest did not ask them to leave, and so they never did. They only shifted. They left no paths behind, no footprints, no marks carved in bark. They walked lightly, slept lightly, lived lightly. And in doing so, they endured. When storms came, they did not run. They clung to branches, faces turned skyward. They let the rain soak them, let the wind pass through them. When thunder broke the sky, they blinked. When lightning split the trees, they waited. And when the world grew still again, they stayed. They did not pray, not with words, but their stillness was a kind of listening. Their breath in the trees was a kind of answer. The Layar knew no village, no place they returned to again and again. Every place was the same place. Every night was a different sky. When the moon rose, some watched it, not because it ruled them, but because it glowed. Its light laid across their backs like cold water. It reminded them they were small, and it reminded them they were alive. No one sang songs, but sometimes they hummed, low and long, not to be heard, only to feel the sound in the chest. It comforted the babies. It comforted the old. It said nothing, but it filled the silence. When the food ran low, they walked again. They did not cry. They did not argue. They moved as they always had. Quiet feet, soft lungs, eyes watching the soil. They found roots. They found berries. They listened for insects beneath the logs. They dug for grubs and broke bark for sap. They did not grow food. They did not plant. They took what was there, and only enough. When it was gone, they did not wait. They moved. That was the way of the Layar, to sleep in trees, to leave no trace, to speak with movement, not with words, to live without building, to pass through the world as though it were sacred but not theirs to own. They were the first to do this, the first to sleep like animals, but wake like something new. And in doing so, they became the beginning of us all. They had seen fire before, but only in brief moments, sparks that flickered and vanished in wind. No one kept it. No one stored it. The Layar did not own the flame. They called it when needed, but never tried to make it stay. They knew how to strike stone against stone. They knew how to catch a spark in moss. They blew gently, slowly, with steady breath. Sometimes the flame would grow, but more often it died. That was fine. They were patient. But one night, the boy stayed awake. The others slept in branches, above the leaves. He sat below, beside the roots, a piece of stone in each hand. His fingers were thin but practiced. His eyes watched the dark, not blinking. He struck once, and saw nothing. He struck again, and still no light. But he did not stop. He struck again, and then a flicker. A thread of orange. It licked the moss, then vanished. He struck again, harder this time. The spark caught and did not fade. He leaned close and whispered air. The fire grew. Not large, not fast. But it stayed. It stayed. That was what made it different. It did not vanish with the wind. It curled, it bent, it warmed the bark. He added a thin root, then a twist of dried grass. The fire fed quietly, like a sleeping mouth. He watched it for a long time. Then he stood and climbed the tree. Carefully, he found the woman sleeping. Her arms curled around her belly. She was heavy with child. Her face was calm, but pale. He called her softly with his hand, not a sound, just a touch. She opened her eyes slowly. He gestured downward. Come. She followed him, down the branches, onto the earth. She saw the fire, and blinked. She had seen fire before, but never one that stayed. She sat beside it. She held her hands out to it. The boy added more bark. They said nothing. Then she gasped. Her hands gripped her stomach. She crouched beside the fire. The boy did not move away. He only watched, still and quiet. She gave birth that night, under the firelight, with her knees in the dirt and her breath shaking the leaves. No one else came. No one else was needed. The boy watched the child emerge, slick with blood, quiet at first. Then a cry. A small sound, thin and high. The fire did not flicker. It held steady. She held the child to her chest. Her eyes closed, her arms firm. The boy reached for a flat leaf. He dipped it into the stream nearby. He offered it to her. She drank. She fed the child. The fire fed itself. All three were quiet. When morning came, the others climbed down from the trees. They saw the smoke and paused. They gathered around it slowly, one by one, without words. They did not ask how it started. They did not ask who made it. They only sat down near it. They warmed their hands. They shared dried roots and bark. The child slept, wrapped in a strip of softened bark. The fire crackled softly beside them. It was not large, but it stayed. From then on, they carried it. When they moved, they saved the coals. They stored embers in hollowed wood, lined with ash and dry leaves. They breathed life into it at night. It came back every time. They no longer needed to strike stone. They no longer feared losing the flame. They had learned that fire could stay. They did not name it. The Layar did not name anything. But they looked at it with care. They kept it dry when rain came. They let it sleep when food was found. They never fed it more than it needed. One night, a man stood near it. He reached his hand too close. The flame leapt, quick and sharp. He pulled away, startled, but unharmed. The others watched. They did not laugh. They did not scold. They simply watched and remembered. The fire would stay. But it would not belong to them. It was not a pet, not a tool. It was a presence. It was part of the night. And so, they began to sleep closer. Not in the trees every night. Sometimes on the ground, near the flame. They arranged themselves in loose spirals, with space between bodies and fire. It changed the way they breathed. It changed the way they listened. The night no longer pressed so tightly. The dark no longer felt so full. They still slept in trees when needed. But now they had a choice. They had light. The boy who had made the fire did not speak of it. No one called him clever. No one called him anything. But when the coals cooled too soon, or the wind blew hard, they handed the gourd to him. He always made the flame return, and the woman who gave birth beneath the first fire that stayed. She would sometimes sit beside it long after the others had gone. Her child, wrapped in bark and ash, slept soundly in her lap. She would hum, soft, without melody, a sound that matched the flame. And the fire stayed. The Layar did not hunt. They did not chase animals across the plains. They did not make spears or sharpen bone. They did not dig traps or set stones. They did not kill what tried to flee. They ate what was already waiting. They ate what moved slowly, what slept in the shade, what grew quietly beside water. They ate roots pulled from the mud, soft bulbs with bitter skins. They peeled them with fingers and teeth. They ate leaves that curled when picked. They chewed vines that oozed pale sap. They crushed insects between flat stones, licked the pulp from their fingertips. They stirred moss into water to drink. They dug into rotten logs for beetles. They cracked shells with their jaws. They did not roast or boil or season. They did not store food in baskets. They did not wait for ripeness. They tasted, and if they lived, they tasted again. They learned by swallowing. They learned by coughing. They learned by watching who did not return. A child once bit into a red flower. Her tongue swelled and her eyes closed. She lay under a tree for 2 days. When she woke, she never ate flowers again. They did not write down what was safe. They remembered with mouths and pain. And that was enough. They did not farm. They did not plant rows of seed. They did not wait for things to grow. They walked until they found food. And when food was gone, they walked again. Their bellies were not always full, but they were never starved. The forest gave what it gave, and they never asked for more. When they found a place near a river, they stayed for a while, not long, just until food ran low. The children played in the shallow water, scooping tiny fish with open hands. Some escaped, but some did not. The children bit them while they still moved. They smiled, fish blood on their teeth. The adults waded in quietly, lifting stones to find white crabs. Some crabs pinched and were dropped. Some were eaten whole, shell and all. A man found a bird's nest. He held it in 2 hands. It held 4 small eggs, warm and blue. He cracked one open with his thumb. He sucked the yolk and passed the rest. No one spoke. They did not say thank you. They did not ask to share. If you had food, you offered it. If not, you waited. One woman scraped green slime from a rock. She smeared it on bark and tasted. Her mouth twisted. She did not spit. She swallowed. She walked away. They did not call food good or bad. Only food or not food. That was enough. Some days they ate nothing but roots. Some days they found mushrooms under trees. Some days they only had water and ash. But they did not complain. There was no word for hunger. It was simply a feeling that meant keep moving, or wait, or be still until the world offered something. They did not speak of taste, only of what kept the body standing. At night they lay with full bellies or empty ones. It did not matter. The stars rose either way, and their hearts still beat. And the next day would bring something new. Sometimes they came across animal remains, bones picked clean by birds and sun. They cracked them open for the soft inside. They licked the marrow from the center. They crushed it between stone and rock. They did not waste. They did not turn away from rot. If it smelled strong, they ate around it. If it moved, they watched carefully. If it bit, they bit back. One child found a turtle. He touched its shell, and it did not move. He brought it to the water. It floated. Still, it did not move. He brought it to a woman nearby. She turned it over and found its belly warm. She broke it open with a rock. The meat inside was yellow and soft. They shared it with the ones closest. The rest waited. No one fought. There was always enough for someone, and that was enough. They did not dry meat for later. They did not build fires to cook it. They ate it as it was. They licked fingers. They wiped mouths. They moved on. The fire, when lit, was not for food. It was for light, for birth, for warmth when the wind bit too hard. But sometimes they used it for bones, to crack them more easily, to make marrow soft enough for children. One boy tried burning a root. He dropped it in the edge of flame. It blackened. He pulled it out. He bit it and smiled. The smoke had changed the taste. No one said anything. But others tried the same. Not often, just sometimes. When they were curious, when the air was calm. But they never relied on fire. Fire was still a guest, not a tool to be expected. And the world had fed them long before fire. The trees had never needed cooking. The earth had never needed help to give. They were not masters of the land. They were its guests, polite, temporary, humble, and so they ate from what was already there. From what crawled and what grew. From what slept too near the water. From what did not run fast enough. From what had fallen or died or soured. And they did not thank the world. They simply lived. and that was thanks enough. The Layar were not the only ones who walked the long, quiet forests. Others moved through the trees as well. Not often, not many, and never for long before. Sometimes they came from the east, carrying smells of salt and smoke. Sometimes from the south, where the bark trees looked different, and the vines grew thicker and low. They did not always speak the same way. They did not call out across the trees. But they saw each other sometimes. And when they did not run. There was no word for stranger. There was only a person not yet known. That was enough. No one was chased away. No one was welcomed loudly. They were simply watched. One day, a woman came alone. She stepped into the clearing at dusk. She wore bark like the Layar, but darker, smoother, with vines tied firm. Her hair was braided with seeds. She walked without fear. The Layar saw her and did not speak. They watched from the edges of the trees. The fire was already burning. She saw it, came closer, and sat on the other side. She did not ask. She did not wait. She sat and listened to the crackle. Then she pulled a fruit from her pouch. It was round, red, soft to the touch, She bit it. Juice dripped from her chin. She did not offer it, but she did not hide it either. One child crept near, curious and slow. The woman broke a piece and gave it. The child tasted it. His eyes lit, wide and quiet. Then he crawled away, and others moved closer. That night, the stranger slept in silence, not in the trees, but curled beneath a patch of grass. She lay near the fire, but not too near. No one touched her. No one asked her name. In the morning, she was still there. She stood and walked to the stream. She drank. She gathered leaves. She crushed them into a paste and rubbed it on a scratch. A man watched from behind a tree. He stepped out without sound. He looked at her. She looked back. They did not speak. He stepped closer, then turned and walked into the brush. She followed. They walked together, slowly, with space between them. They stopped near a wide tree where the roots formed a hollow. There, without sound, they lay together. Not with violence, not with words, not with promise, only with breath and warmth and the old rhythm of the body that knew how to remember what it had never been taught. When it was over, the man stood. He stepped back through the trees. The woman stayed. She sat alone for a while, hands on her knees, eyes on the branches above. Then she stood, returned to the fire, and slept again. No one said anything. The Layar did not call it love. They did not call it wrong. They did not call it anything. It was simply what happened when two bodies met and agreed without needing to speak. 3 mornings later, she was gone. No trail, no words left behind. No sign but a seed dropped near the fire where she had sat. The child who had tasted her fruit picked up the seed. He held it for a while, then let it fall again. The wind carried it away. No one searched for her. No one asked why she came. They only remembered her presence in the way they remembered the scent of smoke or the taste of a bitter root. Sometimes others passed through too. A group of 3, once, 2 men and 1 woman. They stayed for 1 meal. They sat close, shared food, and left before the fire grew cold. No names were exchanged, but their faces were remembered. Their hands, the way they moved, the shape of their shadows in firelight. And sometimes, after such visits, a woman would grow heavy in the belly. No one asked whose it was. No one claimed or denied. It belonged to her, and soon to the tribe. Children born from these moments were no different from others. They climbed trees, ate insects, watched the stars. They did not search for origins. The Layar believed in what was present, not what had passed, not what might return. To them, the stranger was a season. Brief, soft, complete, and then gone. If a stranger returned, They were not greeted with joy. They were simply seen again. And that was enough. No stories were told about them. No memories carved into trees. But their passing left impressions, like footprints in soft ground, soon faded, but real for the time they stayed. The forest was wide. Paths crossed and uncrossed. No one owned the trails. No one stayed still forever. The Layar understood this. Their hearts did not reach outward. They let people pass like clouds across a still sky. And in that silence, something strong was held. A woman might remember a scent. A man might remember a face. A child might wonder, but never ask. And the fire kept burning, and the branches stayed strong, and the tribe moved onward. The stranger was gone. But the wind remained, and the world continued. The Layar did not sleep on the ground. They did not build shelters or lay down mats. They did not cut branches to form a roof. They climbed every night into the trees. Even the smallest children learned how. Even the oldest still climbed slowly upward. Their arms were strong, feet bare and gripping. Their hands knew the bark by feel. They did not speak as they climbed. The dusk was quiet, full of wings. They moved like part of the forest, as if they had always belonged there. Each tree had its own memory. Some were wide, with generous limbs. Some were thin and swayed in wind. But all of them held the Layar, cradled them like long-armed ancestors. No one was assigned a tree. Each person chose where they would sleep. Some always returned to the same one. Some changed trees with the wind. They did not sleep in groups. They spaced apart, never too near. One to each branch, or two at most. The trees needed room to breathe. At night, the world below was dark. The fire burned, yes, but far away. Its glow touched the roots, not the leaves. Up high, there was only starlight. They curled their bodies like roots, their arms tucked in, their legs folded. They leaned into the crook of wood. They listened to the rustle of air. The trees moved gently, with breath. They creaked and shifted under weight. But they did not break. They held. One woman always chose the same branch. It slanted upward, shaped like a cradle. She climbed it each night without sound. She slept with her hand on the bark. A boy chose a branch near hers. He didn't speak, but followed. He liked how the wind felt higher up. He liked the sway, the hush. They never said a word, not once. But each night they returned together, and each morning they climbed down last. Their eyes met for a moment. That was enough. The trees did not judge the sleepers. They did not ask for thanks or praise. They offered their bodies freely each night, and the Layar slept with no dreams. They did not dream like others would later. Their sleep was full and empty, soft like bark, wide like sky. Sometimes a child would fall. Not far, just a slip. The branch would shake and catch them. Or another tree would hold them. It happened. No one feared it. The trees were alive in their own way. When it rained, they stayed in the leaves. They crouched lower, let water run past. Their bark wraps soaked and dried again. They did not come down. Rain was not reason to leave. Only fire or birth called them down. Everything else stayed above. One night, a storm came quickly. Wind snapped small limbs without warning. The trees groaned, pushed into each other. The Layar held on with feet and hands. No one screamed. They crouched low and waited. When morning came, some branches had fallen, but no one was hurt. They climbed down slowly, checking each tree they passed. They gathered fallen bark and dry moss. They fixed nothing. They did not fix what had changed. They only saw, accepted, remembered. Some trees became too thin, some bent too far with age. When that happened, the Layar stopped climbing them. No words were said. They simply stopped, and the tree stood alone. The wind still passed through its limbs. Birds still came and went. But it no longer carried sleepers, and that too was fine. Sometimes a woman would sing, very softly, while climbing or resting. Not with words, just breath in melody. The trees liked the sound. They seemed to sway in time. Her song was like mist. It stayed close to her skin. It did not travel far. But those who heard it always slept more easily that night. She had no name? None of them did. But the others watched her closely. They listened when she moved. They followed the hush of her tune. One child began to hum, then another, then a third. It spread like light through branches. Not loud, not wild, just sound wrapped in stillness. And so the trees became lullabies, not just places to rest, but places to listen. Places where the world touched the soul. If a tree ever cracked beneath weight, no one blamed it. They touched its trunk the next day. They placed a hand there and waited. Then they moved on to another branch, another limb. The trees were family, not furniture. They were not used. They were known. No one claimed a tree forever. No one cut them or carved them. They left no marks. The only trace was warmth, the scent of skin, the bend of leaves, the way bark softened under years of rest. And when a person died, because all things end, they were not buried. Their body was carried to the highest branch that could still bear their weight. They were laid there in silence. Not tied, not wrapped, not burned, just placed gently and left. Birds came first, then insects, then wind and time. The bones fell when ready, and the tree stood again, alone. It remembered, but it did not mourn, and neither did the Layar. They had slept in that tree, too. They had known its strength, its song, its shadow. And so each night they climbed again, not because they had to, but because the branches still called their names, even if those names were never spoken. The Layar did not always have fire. There were days when light faded too early, when wind chilled their backs too soon, when the trees groaned with cold silence, and the sky darkened with no goodbye. Before fire, they only had breath. They had the warmth of bodies pressed close. They had bark wraps and wind shelters. But cold still crept in when night was cruel. Then came the stones. Not all stones, not smooth or soft, but certain ones, black, rough, sharp at the edge. They were found near rivers, near ash-colored dirt. A man once struck 2 stones together, not because he meant to. He tripped. They clashed in his hand. A spark leapt like a winged insect. It vanished before it touched the ground. But he saw it. He sat down, still holding the stones. He hit them again slowly, carefully. Another spark. Then nothing. Then another. He did not shout. He did not show the others. He stayed there until the sky turned blue. When the others sought him again, his eyes were darker, quiet. He held the stones close to his chest. He had seen something sacred. It was days before he showed another. A woman with bark scars on her arms. She watched him strike. She saw the spark. They gathered dry moss. They laid it on stone. They blew gently after each strike. On the 6th day, the moss smoked. Smoke, soft and slow, like breath. They fed it leaves, thin and brown. They cupped their hands around it, and then flame. It danced like a spirit. It licked upward like reaching fingers. It crackled like dry laughter in wind. They did not speak. They only watched it move. That night, fire stayed with the Layar. It did not burn down trees. It did not flee in rain. It stayed, warm and silent at the heart of the clearing, They placed stones in a circle, not for control, only for memory, to mark where the flame had begun. Others learned to strike stone to stone. Not all could do it. Some sparks never caught. Some moss never smoked, but those who learned remembered. They did not guard fire with fear, but they did not play with it either. It was not a toy, not a game. It was the quiet breath of the earth. Children were taught to sit far away, to watch, to feel the heat, but not reach into the light. One girl disobeyed. She reached in, curious and bold. Her fingers touched the edge of flame. She pulled back, crying, skin darkened. But no one scolded her. They let her sit by the fire again. They let her watch it dance again. And she never touched it after that. The fire gave more than warmth. It gave a place to gather, a place to sit without climbing trees, a place where silence felt like home. They spoke more by fire, not with many words, just a few. A name, a sound, a song. Sometimes the woman who sang at night would hum by the fire's edge. The sound curled with the smoke. It lifted with the sparks. She said nothing about the flame. She only sang softer when it burned low. The fire changed their nights. It made the dark less wide. It made the cold less sharp. It made sleep easier near the ground. But they still climbed. The trees were not forgotten. Fire was a guest, a gift, but not a home. The Layar never kept flame all day. When morning came, they let it die. They watched the smoke fade into sun. They scattered the ash with their feet. Fire belonged to night, to shadow and story, to cold and stillness. They did not try to tame it. They did not build cages for it. No clay pits, no hearths, no walls. They lit it again each evening. New spark, new breath, same stones, same hands. They kept the stones close. Some tied them with vine. Others placed them in bark folds. Never dropped, never lost. When they walked to new places, the fire came too. Not lit, but waiting. Always carried, never forgotten. Fire was not sacred. It was not prayed to. But it was treated like a spirit too old to name, too kind to trap. One night, lightning struck a tree nearby. The trunk split with thunder. Flame burst from its center, bright and wild and fast. The Layar stood in silence. They did not run. They did not try to control it. They watched the fire consume the bark. They watched it roar and fall. Then they turned away and let it burn alone. Their fire was different, smaller, softer, listening. A woman once said, though no one wrote it down, "Lightning's fire speaks, ours listens," and they believed her. That belief lived in their hands, each time stone struck stone. Each time moss was placed just right. Each time breath gave life to smoke. Not every night had fire. Sometimes rain was too strong. Sometimes wind stole every spark. Those nights they curled tighter in trees. They remembered warmth with their skin. But when fire came again, they welcomed it quietly and let it be what it was. It never became a god. It never became a master. It remained what it had always been, a flicker from stone and sky, a gift that stayed only if respected, a whisper that warmed but never spoke first. The Layar had no words for mother or father. They did not count family as others would. There were no pairs that stayed together, no names shared between adult and child. A child was born from a body, but belonged to no one and to all. The one who birthed it held it close, but even she did not call it hers. She fed it from her breast in silence. She lay it beside her at night. But if she walked to the river, another woman might carry it instead. No one asked, no one claimed. It was the way of things. Children were seen as the tribe's breath. They belonged to every hand, every fire. One might sit with a quiet man, another with a woman who sang. When they cried, someone would lift them. When they wandered, someone would guide them. But that someone changed each day. And no child was confused by it. There were no fathers, no husbands. The ones who lay together moved on. Sometimes they spoke again, sometimes not. But no thread was tied around the act. The woman carried this child alone, but not alone in spirit, only in body. The tribe saw her and the child, and they made space around both. They offered bark to wrap the baby. They offered berries and roots and songs. No rituals, no naming, only presence, only warmth. The children did not crawl on mats. They learned to grip bark with their hands. They clung to shoulders and backs, their tiny feet hooked like vines. They grew quickly, quiet and observing. They learned to listen before they moved. They watched how the adults moved through trees. They copied, not because told, but because they understood. One child liked the fire. He sat close each night, eyes still. Another climbed too high, too soon. He fell, was caught by a branch. The tree swayed hard, and he cried. But the tribe did not scold him. They watched him climb again, slowly. And they nodded, once, in silence. There were no lessons, only demonstrations. No punishments, only pauses. The tribe moved at the child's pace. When one was slow, they stayed nearby. When one was strong, they stepped back. They did not cheer. They did not clap. They only noticed, and that was enough. Children learned to eat what others ate. Crushed roots, soft insects, ripe berries. They reached for the bowl, not asked. They chewed as others chewed. They learned by being present. When they cried at night in trees, a hand would reach from above, a touch to the head, a finger to the lip, not always from the one who birthed them. Sometimes from an old man, sometimes from a passing hand. All hands were gentle. All hands remembered. As children aged, they were not told what to become. They followed the rhythms of the forest. Some sang, some ran, some watched. The one who watched became a listener. He stayed quiet near the fire. He heard more than others knew. He noticed patterns in the flame. The tribe did not assign roles. The tribe observed, then allowed. No one said, "You will be this." They waited to see who a child was. Then they stepped back and let that path unfold. No child was beaten. No child was shut out. Even when they disobeyed, the answer was stillness. A woman once left her baby. She placed it near a tree and walked away for many hours. When she returned, it was asleep, wrapped in bark, fed, safe. No one asked why she left. No one asked what she did. They only nodded once. She picked the child up again. They trusted the forest. They trusted each other. There were no secrets, only moments that belonged to one. And those were respected like roots, hidden, strong, part of the whole. When a child turned strong enough to climb, they were shown a sleeping branch. The same branch the mother once used, or the one a quiet singer preferred. They climbed. They fell. They climbed again. And one night they slept in that branch without fear. And that was the moment they grew. No age was marked, no coming-of-season feast, only the branch and the sky above, and the silent knowing that the child had joined the trees. They still played, tossing seeds and chasing frogs. They still laughed, but never too loudly. The forest asked for gentleness. The tribe modeled it well. Even the wildest child learned calm. Not from scolding, from rhythm, from watching wind and leaf. A boy once shouted at the fire. He danced and stomped, wild and loud. An old woman sat beside him and breathed slowly, deeply. She said nothing. He watched her chest rise and fall. He sat down beside her, and after a while, he breathed the same way. That was the Layar's way. To raise without command, to guide without hand, to listen more than speak. And in that silence, children grew steady. Not all survived. Some grew sick. Some wandered too far. Some slipped when no one saw. But those who stayed became branches. Strong, flexible, reaching toward sun. And the tribe never asked for more. They did not mourn what wasn't. They only loved what was. And that love was quiet, steady, woven through every vine, every breath, every sound that a child learned to take alone. The rains did not come often, but when they came, they stayed. The sky turned to stone and wept. Daylight became dim, soft, and quiet. The forest darkened with dripping green. Leaves sagged under the weight of water. The trees whispered with swollen breath. And the Layar did not complain. They did not curse the sky. They did not run for shelter. They stayed in the trees, as always, wrapped in soaked bark, silent and still. The water slid across their backs. It pooled at their feet. It trickled down their arms like vines. But they stayed calm. Their bodies knew the rhythm of rain. The rain had no anger, no hunger. It simply came and stayed and left. Some climbed higher to escape the wet. Some curled against the thicker trunks. The fire would not light those days. Stone struck stone, but the moss stayed dark. The Layar did not force it. They did not battle the water. They accepted cold and wet like wind, like breath. Children huddled against grown bodies. Mothers tucked them beneath their arms. Old men leaned into hollows of bark. No one moved more than they had to. Meals were quiet and plain. Roots chewed slowly. Insects softened by rain. Hands cupped water from leaf basins. No laughter, no dancing. Only watching, only waiting. When the rains stayed for many days, the forest changed its voice. Drips turned to streams, streams into rivers. Paths disappeared under moving ground. The Layar watched the world shift. They moved less, spoke less, breathed deeper. They listened to the trees groan, not with fear, but with care. If a tree leaned too far, they moved to another. No grief, no blame. The forest rearranged itself, and so did they. A boy once slipped in the storm. The branch beneath him turned slick. He fell to a lower limb, caught by the bark's bend. He did not cry. He climbed again. Slower, wiser. Another child played with raindrops. She held a leaf over her head, watching drops slide like silver threads. She giggled once, then fell silent. Even joy was quiet in the rain. One evening, the wind howled hard. Trees bent like reeds. The canopy swayed like an ocean. The Layar did not sleep that night. They held tight to limbs and silence. Their eyes stayed open, their breath slow, a kind of wakefulness that did not seek escape. They did not call it the storm. They did not name anything. It was sky mood, cloud song, world shift, and they waited it through. By the fourth day, the forest floor vanished. Only brown water and floating roots. No path, no ground, just movement beneath the trees. The tribe stayed above. No one descended. Even those who feared heights stayed up, trusting branch more than mud. A woman gave birth on the fifth day. High in a forked branch, knees pulled close, face calm. The child arrived quiet, slippery with rain. She did not cry. She blinked into the downpour. The mother wrapped her in wet bark, pressed her to skin, and closed her eyes. The rain did not pause for her, but it did not harm her either. That child would grow strong. She would love the wind. The Layar marked no birthdays, but they remembered her birth as the one carried on a flood. When the rain finally slowed, it did not stop all at once. It softened, turned to mist, then to drops, then to nothing, and the forest sighed. Leaves lifted their heads again. Trunks stood straighter. The birds returned with tentative wings. The Layar climbed down, slowly, carefully. The ground was soft, moss and mud everywhere. They stepped with bare feet, feeling the earth's new shape. They did not complain. They did not rush to dry themselves. They stood in the light and let the sun find them. They gathered fallen bark, shook off the water, laid it in quiet piles. They found dry stones again, struck them once, twice. The moss smoked, the flame returned, and the fire breathed again. The tribe sat near it, not to speak, but to witness. They were not proud. They were not afraid. They were simply there, still, present. The child born in rain watched the flame with wide eyes. She reached one hand forward, then drew it back. A woman sang once more, a soft tune, barely above the breeze. The tribe breathed in unison, their eyes half closed, their bodies calm. They had survived without asking to. They had endured without needing to say so. The forest had bent. The trees had held. The sky had wept. And all of it was part of the song. The Layar did not write songs down. They had no words carved in bark, no stories painted on stone walls. And yet they remembered everything, not with minds alone, but with bodies, with breath, with motion through the trees. Songs were not taught. They were heard, then felt, then followed. No one said, "Repeat after me." No one clapped a rhythm aloud. But somehow the sound remained, moving from voice to voice. It always began with a hum, low, like wind through high leaves, a sound with no sharp edges, a sound without beginning or end. An old woman would hum while weaving. A man would hum while grinding roots. A child would hear it and later echo it without knowing why. That was the way of Layar songs. No names, no titles, no applause, just sounds that traveled like mist through breath and bone. The songs were not for dancing. They were not loud or wild. They had no drums, no flutes, no strings. They lived in the throat, soft and low. They flowed through the nose, round and slow. Some songs were only one note. A note stretched like sky at dawn. It rose and fell like a river bend. Some were made of small sounds, repeated like footfalls on bark, and always they returned to silence. The forest sang too. The rain had a rhythm. The birds had their own verses. Even the fire whispered melodies in its crackling breath. The Layar listened. Then they joined in, but never too loud. Their songs were meant to fit inside the world, not rise above it. A girl once hummed near the river. She was young, barely weaned from bark milk. But her voice carried well. A small circle formed around her. No one told her to continue. No one interrupted. They simply listened. She kept humming, eyes half closed, hands in the dirt. The river rippled in time. The wind leaned toward her, and when she stopped, no one spoke. They just smiled softly, then walked on. That was how songs lived, not as possessions, but as guests. A woman sang only when grinding. A man hummed only while watching trees. A child sang in sleep, though no one knew the tune. The Layar never corrected one another. If a note was strange, they let it stay strange. If a tone bent oddly, they welcomed its bend. A song once came from a sleeping elder. He mumbled a sound in his breath. The sound repeated every few moments. Another elder sat nearby and began to hum the same note. Then another joined, and another. By morning, that sound had become a lullaby. Not because anyone wrote it, but because they remembered. The tribe sang most when alone, in trees while gathering, by fires while waiting. Singing was not performance. It was presence. It was the body becoming air for a little while. A mother hummed while feeding. Her child did not know the melody. But years later, the child hummed the same tune while walking in rain. No one told them it was right. No one said, "That is your mother's song." But it was. Songs wove through generations like threads with no color, felt but never held. A man once lost his voice. He drank cold river water too fast. His throat grew tight. His hums grew hoarse. He could not speak for many days. But still, he sang. With fingers, with taps on his leg, with movement of shoulder and breath. The others understood. They answered with rhythm in feet, with a sway in the way they sat, with stillness that spoke louder than sound. For the Layar, a song could be a silence, a quiet moment beneath the stars, a shared breath beneath a tree. They did not need to remember lyrics. They remembered feelings, warmth, wind, weight. That was enough. There were no sad songs. There were no happy songs. Only songs that matched the air. Only songs that matched the moment. And when a moment passed, the song hung past with it, gone, but not lost. A girl once asked an elder, "Why don't we keep songs in stones?" The elder smiled. "If the stone breaks, will you forget the sky?" The girl thought for a while. Then she stood up and began to hum. The elder joined, then the wind, then the birds, and nothing needed writing. The tribe moved again next morning. New trees, new sleeping branches, new paths beneath soft leaves. But the songs came too, unwritten, unowned, unlost. They lived in the throat. They moved in the breath. They waited in the hush between one footstep and the next. That is how the Layar sang. Not with music, but with memory. Not with melody, but with meaning. And every sound, no matter how faint, was heard. The first time they made fire, they thought it was alive. It hissed like an animal waking. It moved like a creature's breath. It ate the bark and dried leaves. It grew hungry if left alone. The fire was not just warmth. It was not just light in darkness. To the Layar, fire was a visitor from another world. It came only when invited, and it left if ignored. They made it from stone and patience, rubbing dry moss, striking flint-like rocks again and again. It could take minutes. It could take hours. Sometimes it did not come at all, and when it did, they treated it like a spirit. They sat near it with respect. No one shouted. No one laughed too loud. They fed it like a baby bird. Small twigs, dry leaves, then a curled bark nest. One breath too strong, and the flame vanished. One wet leaf, and the smoke coughed and died. The Layar learned to listen to fire, to hear what it wanted, to know when it needed more, and when it asked for stillness. They built no hearths, no stone circles, just bare ground beneath trees. A clearing found, a patch of safe dirt, and there they lit their flame. Never two fires in one place, only one, always one, because more than one made them nervous. Too many flames, too many hungers. They believed one flame was enough to carry all stories, all heat, all songs. At night the fire danced quietly. Its light touched the trunks gently. Its glow sat in the eyes of those nearby. Sometimes a child reached too close. The fire licked their finger, not in anger, but as warning. The pain was small. The lesson stayed forever. They never used fire to burn forests, never to harm animals. Fire was not a weapon. It was a guest. Even when they cooked with it, they whispered thanks. Even when it warmed wet feet, they bowed their heads. They knew it could vanish. They knew they could not command it. Fire stayed only for the quiet, only for the patient. It would not stay for rage. It would not serve the angry hand. One man once struck stones in anger. He wanted heat, but his hands were shaking. The stones sparked, but the moss stayed cold. Again, until he stopped, sat, breathed, then tried once more, and the flame arrived, not with a roar but a whisper. They cooked roots above it, laid soft insects on bark nearby, held fruit close until it steamed. But they never cooked meat. Meat was eaten raw or dried, because blood near fire felt wrong. The Layar believed fire was born of breath, not bone. It did not want death near it, only life or silence. When someone died, the fire was not lit. They waited days before striking stone. Let the forest hold the body. Let the tribe remember without flame. Then, one night, they'd gather again. Strike stone, catch spark, feed it slowly, and let the light return. Sometimes fire helped birth a song. A rhythm found in crackle. A melody carried by flicker. They did not plan this. It simply rose, and they followed. No words, no rhythm, just warmth and sound. Fire never became tool or trophy. It remained companion. A flickering guide in a dark world. They told children, the fire does not belong to you. It stays if you stay. It leaves if you shout. And the children believed. They watched it with wide eyes, fed it slowly, fell asleep beside it. No one poked it, no one scattered it for fun. Only one time did a child disobey. He kicked dust on the flame. It coughed and vanished. The tribe did not yell. They did not punish. They waited until night fell again, then asked the boy to bring the stones. He struck them. He breathed carefully, and when the fire came back, he cried softly, not from pain, from understanding. They did not comfort him. They only nodded, and the fire burned steady. In heavy rain, fire was memory only. But when the sky cleared, they lit it again, not with urgency, but as greeting. Hello again? Their eyes seemed to say. Sometimes the fire told them when to move on. If it refused to light 3 times, they packed their things. It meant the place was tired. It meant the forest wanted rest. The tribe obeyed. They never forced the flame. Some nights no fire was made, only stars, only wind, and that was enough. Other nights the flame burned bright, long, alive, and in that glow they whispered their stories, soft truths, old moments, not shared to teach, not spoken to impress, just spoken to be heard. That is what the fire meant. A listener, if you spoke gently. A light, if you did not demand it. And when the Layar slept, they let it die. They did not keep it burning all night. The forest did not like that. Fire must sleep too, so they gave it darkness. And in return, the fire always came back. When the wind turned colder, the tribe began to feel it. It was not sudden or cruel, just a slow, deep breath from the north. The leaves curled slightly at the tips. The insects moved less, spoke less. The Layar did not measure time. They did not mark days on stones, but they knew when the north wind came. They felt it in their joints, in the way bark stiffened underfoot, in how water grew still before sunset. They never panicked. They simply prepared to move. They had no village to leave behind, no walls, no rooms, no gardens, only memories of trees once climbed, only paths that faded behind them. When the first child sneezed, the women gathered bark wraps. When the birds flew lower, the men stopped looking for fruit. And when the fire took longer to start, they turned their bodies south. It was not called a migration. It had no name at all. It was just the way. The younger ones followed the older. The older followed the quiet. The quiet followed the air. They walked in long lines, bare feet pressing moss and root. Sometimes single file, sometimes side by side. They made no announcements. No one said, "We are going." They simply went. The north wind did not chase them. It did not rush. But it waited behind them like a distant drum. The trees changed as they moved. Narrow trunks widened. Cool greens warmed to amber. Bark darkened. Air thickened. They stopped only when needed. To drink. To sleep. To greet a stream. Sometimes they climbed trees again. Sometimes they slept on ground leaves, but always they moved again by dawn. Children asked no questions. Their feet learned the path by feeling. The south was not a destination. It was a direction of warmth, of food, of peace. Along the way, they passed places they had forgotten. A fallen log once used for stories. A tree with a split trunk where 2 lovers once climbed. No one pointed, but eyes softened. A woman walked slower near one tree. A man hummed differently at another, and the past slipped gently into breath. They met no other tribes. None crossed their path. Perhaps others moved too, in their own way, by their own winds. But the Layar never wandered long. The road needed quiet. The body needed rest. At night they lit no fires. Only soft hums and bark shelters. The stars above them changed shape. The moon rose later each night. A girl once counted stars aloud. No one stopped her, but no one joined. They respected the sky as they did fire. A guest, never a possession. Sometimes it rained while they walked. They let it fall. Let it soak. They carried no tools. No burdens. Only what fit in hand or skin. The old ones did not complain. The young ones did not rush. They stopped beside rivers. Beside strange rocks. Beside trees shaped like stories. Then moved again. Every few days they found signs of the south. Warmer wind, more fruit, more bird calls. And one day, a boy removed his bark wrap. Not from pride, but from heat. That night they knew they had arrived. Not at a village, not at a place, but at the season where rest could begin again. They climbed into the trees with ease, with welcome. No frost on the branches, no stillness in the roots. The leaves danced again. The bark softened. They lit fire once more. It took only 2 strikes. The flame came quick like an old friend, and they sat. No song, no speech. Only the sound of having arrived. They would stay until the wind spoke again. Not a calendar, not a rule. Just the air turning north once more. And when that time came, they would rise again. Pack nothing, carry no map, and walk as they always had. Toward warmth, toward rhythm, toward enough. That was the path of the Layar, not drawn, not named, but always remembered. There came a time when the forest did not feel still. Not loud, not angry, but watchful. The leaves did not rustle with the same rhythm. The roots felt tighter underfoot. Even the birds paused more often. The Layar noticed, though no one said it aloud. They simply slowed. Breathed shallower. Listened longer. This was not fear. It was attention. A child once ran through tall grass and stopped suddenly. Not because of danger, but because the air had changed shape. It was like stepping into a thought, or brushing against something unseen. The elders knew what it meant. The forest was breathing back. Not in words, not in movement, but in presence. The Layar had lived long enough to know the forest listened. But sometimes, very rarely, it answered. Not with storm, not with fire, but with breath. One night, a wind moved in no direction. It circled around them, soft as cloud, sharp as bone. No one spoke. They simply sat near the fire, letting the air curl through their hair, between their fingers. The fire bent strangely. Not left, not right, just inward. A woman placed bark in the flames. It did not catch. She tried again. Still nothing. Then she stopped, closed her eyes, touched her forehead, and sat still. Moments later, the fire sparked on its own. No one smiled. No one clapped. They knew. The forest had asked for stillness first. Another night, a tree dropped its bark in circles. Perfect, wide, unbroken rings. Children collected them without knowing why. They strung them on a vine, held them near the fire. And suddenly, a hum began. No one started it. It simply rose, like mist from warm earth. The bark rings began to shake. Lightly, rhythmically, as if breathing. The tribe sat in silence. Not from awe, but from understanding. The forest had exhaled. Sometimes it happened with animals. A deer walked into camp once. No fear, no pause. It walked slowly past every person, then stood near the smallest fire. The child feeding that fire looked into the deer's eyes, then offered a leaf. The deer took it, chewed, and left. No one followed. No one questioned. Later, the fire burned brighter than it had all week. Another day, moss grew overnight into the shape of hands. Open palms, fingers wide. They found it under the sleep tree. Some thought it meant comfort. Others thought it was warning. But no one removed it. They slept nearby with respect. It rained the next day, just enough to clean the moss without destroying it. And by night, the palms had faded. The Layar never searched for meaning too hard. They accepted what was offered. No more. No less. Sometimes the breath of the forest was silence. Not empty, but full. The kind of silence that wraps around the heart. The kind that hums beneath your ribs when nothing else moves. They called it the listening quiet. And when it came, they did not speak, even with their eyes. They let it pass through them. like smoke, like sleep. Once, during listening quiet, an old man fell asleep sitting up. When he woke, he whispered a name no one had heard before. They did not repeat it. They simply let it be said, once, then forgotten. But they remembered how it felt. That was enough. Not every moment was like this. Most days were simple. Walking, eating, climbing, resting. But once in a while, when the air thickened, when the leaves held still, they knew the forest was near. More near than usual, more alive than usual, and they welcomed it. Not by bowing, not by prayer, just by being still. Open, breathing. One child once asked, "How do we know the forest loves us?" An elder replied, "We don't. We only know it listens." And for the Layar, that was enough. The trees had no voice, but they echoed memory. The wind had no form, but it carried presence. And the forest, the deep, endless forest, was not home, was not parent, was not God. It was companion. It watched, it waited. And sometimes when the path was right, it breathed. And the Layar, soft of foot, quiet of voice, breathed with it. There was one among the Layar who never closed his eyes to dream. He was not older than the others, not stronger, not faster, but different. When the tribe slept, he would lie still with eyes wide open. He did not speak much. He did not sing. But he watched, not just with sight, but with presence. The others called him the one who dreamed awake. No one feared him. No one followed him. He simply walked with them as they moved south or north. He carried no bundle, no bark wrap. He wore only the smallest belt of softened bark. When fire was lit, he sat nearby, but never close. He waited until all others had taken food, then picked what remained. Not out of humility, but rhythm. He moved like time no one had measured. Once, a child asked him, "What do you see when your eyes don't close?" He replied, "I see the trees breathe." The child laughed softly, but never asked again. The elders never asked him to speak. The women never brought him closer. But sometimes they watched his face to know what the day would bring. When the sky turned gray, he blinked once. That was enough. When the fire hissed oddly, he tilted his head. That was enough. He never gave warning, never gave blessing. But his stillness held weight. One evening he sat beneath a leaning tree. The sun dipped low. The air felt thick. And he whispered, only once, "She is coming." No one asked who, no one needed to. That night, no one climbed the trees. They slept on ground leaves, together, like roots tangled beneath soil. A storm came, not with thunder, but with light, flashes that did not burn, winds that circled without pushing, and then quiet again. The next morning, the one who dreamed awake stood early. He walked alone, but not far. Children followed, at a distance. He stood before a large stone, half buried, moss-covered. He touched it with both palms, and the moss began to lift. Not fall, but lift, like it knew his skin. Underneath, the stone showed carvings. Not deep, not clear, just marks. Waves, trees, circles. No one had seen them before. No one knew their meaning. He stepped back, said nothing, and returned to camp. That night, the tribe sat near the fire. The man sat farther away than usual. He stared at the flame, but did not blink. When the flame danced, he did not move. When the sparks flew, he remained still. Then, he spoke. Not loud, not urgent, just enough. "I dreamed a path that leads through fog but ends in song." They did not ask him to lead. They did not ask him to stay. But the next morning they followed him. He did not guide with hands. He did not speak. He just walked, as he always had. But this time, they followed the silence behind him. Through tall ferns, through cold streams, over stones shaped like sleeping faces. After 3 days, they found a place where birds did not sing, but where the wind carried music anyway. No source, no echo, just sound, as if the trees themselves hummed low and slow. There they stopped. There they stayed for 7 nights. Each night the man sat alone. He whispered to the trees, or perhaps they whispered to him. On the 8th morning, he stood and walked into the fog. No goodbye, no backward glance. He vanished, Some children waited for his return. Others said he became the fog. The elders said nothing, but the next day, moss grew in a perfect spiral around the stone where he had last sat. And that night, the fire sparked without stone, without bark, without touch. It simply began, as if he had left one last breath behind. From that day forward, they remembered him not with songs, but with silence. And whenever the trees stood especially still, whenever the wind turned warm but the sky stayed cool, they said, "The one who dreamed awake is listening again." And they dreamed with their eyes open a little more. Long before language had shape, the Layar listened to sound. Not words, not chants, but the raw hum of bark and wind. They believed the forest kept stories inside its trees, not carved, not written, but remembered through song. Each tree held a memory, not like humans do, but in rhythm, in silence, in vibration. One day, a boy climbed a tree with long, soft bark. It curled at the edges, thick and red like resting embers. As he pulled himself upward, a strip of bark came loose, not torn, but lifted, as if offered. He held it in both hands. It was warm, very warm, and as the wind passed through, the bark began to hum. Not loud, not high, but steady. The boy froze. He did not speak, he only listened. Others gathered below. They heard it too. The hum did not rise or fall. It stayed constant, like the beat of old footsteps. They did not ask the boy to bring the bark down. He came down slowly, bark in hand. They placed it near the fire. It sang louder. The flame danced to match it. No one claimed it. No one dared call it theirs. But they all sat closer that night. An elder placed her palm flat against the bark. Her eyes closed. Then she spoke. "One tree remembers all feet that passed its roots." Another elder listened, touched the bark, then said, "This one remembers a man who cried alone beneath its lowest branch." The children whispered, "Does bark keep our stories?" And someone answered, "It keeps what we leave behind." They did not burn the bark, they did not bury it. They built a small circle of stones around it. Each morning they returned and sat in quiet. The bark sang softly each dawn. By midday it went still. At dusk it hummed again. Not the same tune as morning. Some believed it followed the sun. Others believed it followed memory. One child said, "It sings what we forget." Another night the hum turned low and slow. An old woman touched it, then sighed. "My sister has left the world." No one had known she passed. But the next day, a small path of petals was found near the river. They said the bark knew. They said it had told her the moment her sister walked on. One evening, a stranger came, not from another tribe, for the Layar knew none, but from the north. Skin pale, eyes full of stone. He did not speak in their way. He pointed. He stared. Then he sat by the bark. They watched him. He placed both hands on its surface. The bark hummed louder than it ever had before. He wept. Tears fell fast and heavy. But he smiled through them. He did not stay. By morning he was gone. But the bark's song changed after that day. It became clearer, more like a voice that was nearly words, but not quite. It never fully spoke, but it almost did. The tribe stopped calling it bark. They began to call it the one that remembers. They built a second ring of stones. They sat in a wider circle. Each person took a turn touching the bark. Not daily, but when they felt something heavy in their chest. They never spoke their pain aloud, but the bark sang it, soft and low. No judgment, no echo, just sound that knew how to carry grief. Once, the bark went silent for 3 days. The forest held its breath. No wind, no birds, no insects. Then, on the 4th night, the hum returned, but with a note no one had heard before. It sounded like a child's laugh carried far across a lake, and everyone smiled, even without knowing why. The one who dreamed awake once returned and sat beside it. He placed his hand near it, but not on it, and still it hummed for him. He whispered, "It remembers all the footsteps we forget we made." Then he left again, as he always did. The bark remained, the hum remained, but the Layar never tried to keep it. One morning they woke to find the bark gone. No trace, no burn, No footprints. Only the stones remained. And silence. But the silence did not feel empty. It felt complete, as if the song had finished its breath. They did not mourn it. They did not replace it. They simply began to hum quietly when sitting near trees. Not in hope, not in sorrow, but in rhythm. With what might still be listening, they walked along this riverbank at dawn. Mist rose like ghostly hands from water. The world felt new and gentle. No one spoke aloud as they moved. Their feet whispered on soft, wet earth. Bird songs greeted them from unseen branches. The child born in rain led the way. Her steps were quiet, curious, and light. She paused to examine a smooth stone. A woman knelt beside her, watching closely. She held a strip of softened bark. She braided it carefully into a loop. The child crouched and touched the water. Ripples spread like soft spun threads of silver. She watched them vanish, one by one. They continued southward without haste. The south path was familiar, but changed. New trees had grown. Old trees had fallen. Each fallen trunk told a silent story. No one carved words into its surface. The forest spoke through crooked lines of bark. A man reached out and touched the curve. His fingers whispered along the grain. He closed his eyes, breathing deep. They moved on, leaving no footprints behind. Only a memory pressed into the ground, only breath fading into morning air. At midday, they found shelter beneath broad leaves. They rested on moss cushions, shared roots. They chewed slowly, savoring every bitter bite. One elder hummed softly, a lonely tune. It rose like smoke above their heads. The child paused eating to listen. She looked around at gentle faces. Each one held calm understanding inside. No one explained the hum's purpose. They simply listened together in silence, then resumed their meal without rush. Meals were small, enough to sustain. After eating, they lay back and watched sky. Clouds drifted like silent white boats. The sun warmed their skin through leaves. They fell quiet, drifting toward soft sleep. No one sang here, but breath grew slow and even. When they woke, shadows had shifted across the ground. They gathered water in shells and vines. They washed their faces and hands. The south path led them through a meadow. Wild flowers bent under their gentle steps. They smelled like distant memories and rain. One flower stood taller than the rest, petals pale as moonlight, center like gold. The child reached out, brushing one petal. It trembled lightly, then released a seed. She caught it in her palm, curious. She rolled it gently between two fingers. A leaf fell from above, landing beside her. She pressed both items into her bark belt. She smiled softly, then rejoined the line. They walked on beneath warming skies. The path wound between ancient stone markers. Each marker was a standing slab of granite. No carvings remained, only weathered shapes. Yet the stones felt deliberate, placed with care. They guided the tribe as footsteps once had. An elder paused to touch a marker. He traced its edge with gentle fingers. He smiled inwardly, then moved on. The day grew long, sun dipping toward west. They found a fallen log for a bridge. They crossed a narrow stream, barefoot and calm. On the other side, tall grasses bent softly. They whispered secrets as the breeze passed through. The tribe listened, stepping carefully between blades. A man bent to gather a torn feather. He held it up to the light. It shimmered with colors of dusk. He placed it in his hair behind his ear. No one commented. It simply belonged there. They climbed a gentle hill covered in moss. At its top, they paused to breathe deep. They saw the south sky stretch before them. They stood still for a moment together. The view below shimmered with quiet promise. A ribbon of forest stretched into the distance. Here and there, old paths crossed between clusters of trees. The elder pointed gently with an open palm. "There," he said softly. "That is where we once gathered." The others nodded without speaking. The children looked on in wonder. They began to descend slowly, feet brushing soft moss with care. As they neared the old place, they felt something beneath their steps. Not stone, not bark, but memory. A feeling of return settled in them. The wind shifted, carrying familiar scents. Smoke, ash, old warmth. They came upon the old fire ring. Stones were still in place, though some had sunken deeper. Ashes had vanished, but the shape remembered flame. They sat without speaking. Each found their usual place, as if they'd never left. One by one they looked at the empty circle. No one reached for bark or stone. They waited. Then the youngest child stood. She walked to the center and placed the flower's seed. Just that, nothing more. The others watched. Then the oldest woman removed a feather from her hair and laid it beside the seed. And slowly, without any command, others added small things. A pebble smoothed by stream, a curled leaf, a thin vine plucked. Days before. When it was done, they sat back again, watching the center in silence. The wind moved gently. The leaves above barely stirred. And yet the circle felt alive. They did not need fire tonight. The warmth came from within. That evening, the stars arrived early. They blinked through purple dusk like quiet voices returning. The children curled up first, heads on arms, breathing deep. Then the elders lay down, backs to roots. On sky. The south path had returned them not to a place, but to a moment. Not just the space of firestones, but the quiet between them. Sleep came gently, like mist, like old song. And in the night, one child awoke. She did not cry. She simply looked upward. The stars shimmered like moving eyes. She sat up, held the seed in her hand, and for a moment she hummed, a soft single note, carried nowhere, but heard by everything. Then she smiled, and slept again. They came to it at the end. The journey was neither planned nor finished. They simply arrived, as if guided by time. It stood alone, not tallest, not oldest, but waiting. Its trunk bent like a question, its branches reached as if unsure. The bark was dark but soft to touch. No vines clung to it, no birds nested above. But the air around it was not still. The Layar gathered in a wide circle. Not close, not distant, just far enough to see. The elder who had lost her voice placed her hand over her heart. The child born in rain held her gaze for a moment, and then, without word, she walked toward the tree. She did not hesitate. She touched the bark gently. She closed her eyes and leaned in, her forehead pressed against its side. She stood that way for many breaths. Then she stepped back and sat at its roots. The others followed. One by one they approached and listened. Not to a sound, but to something older. Something that felt like memory. They did not ask the tree questions. They knew it would not answer. But still, they felt its presence. They began to speak, not aloud, but in thought. They remembered their first migrations, the stones they crossed, the rivers they followed. They remembered trees that bent to shade them, bark that whispered in wind, branches that cradled their sleep. They remembered the time they first made fire. They remembered the laughter of a child who had no name, but was known by all. They remembered the silence of a woman who hummed only once, and that was enough. Each memory found its place in the air around that tree. They did not weep, they did not rejoice, they simply felt. Night came slowly, as if afraid to interrupt. Stars blinked above through the open sky. The tree stood darker against the fading light. They did not sleep in trees that night. They slept beside roots, on soft moss. The earth felt warm beneath them. The wind passed like a breath. And somewhere, a single bird sang. Not a song of warning, not of joy, but of stillness. The next morning, the child woke first. She sat up and looked at the tree. It had changed. Not in shape, but in presence. A new sprout had appeared. Small. Bright. Reaching upward beside the old trunk. She smiled and did not touch it. She only looked until the others stirred. One by one, they rose in quiet. They noticed the sprout and said nothing. It did not need explanation. They ate a small meal. They drank from leaf-wrapped water. Then they stood again in a circle. And the elder who had lost her voice spoke. Only one word, enough. Then they turned. Not away in farewell, but forward. They left no mark on the tree, no carvings, no tokens, but they remembered it. They remembered the shape of its roots, the sound of its stillness, the breath it held without moving. And as they walked, they felt lighter, not because they left something behind, but because something had joined them, a rhythm, a silence, a seed that would echo in the next place. They did not know if they would return, but they knew the tree would remain, long after their feet were gone, long after names were born, long after villages and stories and maps. The tree would stand and remember. Not with thought, not with voice, but with presence. That was enough. And so the Layar walked on, into mist, into warmth, into story. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. Whether you listened wide awake or drifted gently to sleep, I'm grateful you were here. The world of the Layar was quiet, but full of meaning, like all things we forget to notice. If you're still awake, feel free to leave a comment. Tell me where in the world you're listening from, and what time it is right now. Are you listening at midnight, under soft blankets and starlight? Or is it early morning with the sun just beginning to rise? Wherever you are, whenever you are, I'm glad we shared this story together. If this brought you calm, if it helped you rest, consider subscribing to the channel. It helps me continue to tell quiet stories like this one. Stories that ask nothing from you except to close your eyes and listen. Until next time, sleep well. And remember, the first people didn't need much, just trees to sleep in and silence to hold them. Good night from me to you.